Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's first Insider Threat podcast. And what we're going to talk about for today is our 4 Active Directory attacks and how to protect against them. This was a recent blog series written by Jeff Warren, and we also did a video for it. And we're going to talk about sort of the behind the scenes, meaning, well, how scary are these attacks and how scary was it to make this series? I'm Jonathan Sander, CTO here at StealthBits, and joining me, as I said, is Jeff Warren. He's our SVP of Technical Product Management. Jeff, thanks for being here. How are you today?
Doing great.
All right, excellent. So since Jeff is so modest, I will give him a small introduction. He's a cybersecurity veteran. He's been in the trenches helping organizations protect against Active Directory attacks for a very long time. What we're going to do is, like I said, walk through a little bit of how he was able to break down these attacks and give you a sense of how you can then do things like prevent people from doing LDAP reconnaissance and getting in and doing really nasty things like getting to your DIT file or doing past the hash attacks. But if you want to learn about how to protect them, again, go check out the blog series and the video. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how we got there, right? So the first question I've got for you, Jeff, how hard was it for you to formulate these attacks? Did it take a lot of special effort, or did you just like do a bunch of searches to find these, or and how long did it take you to get the info once you started digging in?
So each portion of the attack in itself is not that complicated, but tying it together, you could say, might be a little complicated. You really have to start with your end goal in mind. And in this case, this blog series shows how you can go from having no privileges at all to complete domain compromise by getting domain admin rights and extracting the DIT file, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So taking a massive goal like that is going to take multiple attacks along the way to discover where the targets are, escalate privileges, move laterally. But the individual attacks, they're just a Google search away. They're not that complicated in and of themselves. Tying them together, you need to know what you're trying to accomplish.
So if I was the bad guy and I wanted to string these things together, and let's say I figured out how to do that, how long would it take me, do you think, to at least formulate the attacks? Now, obviously, to have each stage of the attack succeed, that there's a lot of luck involved. I get that, but how long do you think it would take me to stage my attack, get ready to go after somebody?
So it depends on how secure the organization is that they're looking to attack. But in the worst case scenario, it can be extremely easy and accomplished in just minutes by trying some of these more basic attacks because of the way the security is laid out. If an organization has moderate security, then there's going to be a bit of trial and error, guess and check, try one attack, hit a roadblock. You have to explore other attack paths until you can figure it out. But one of the really cool things about some of the tools we looked at in this blog series, like Bloodhound, is it does all the hard work of painting out each of these attack paths for you. So it shows you, by discovering the environment, here's the route to follow. Here's the way that you can get from your current state to your desired goal. So it makes the job really easy on an attacker.
So it's one thing to go out and find these attacks on the internet. A lot of people here at StealthBits, especially you, of course, have a pretty deep understanding of Active Directory and the Microsoft platform. You have a lot of knowledge and experience there. Does the attacker need to have that level of understanding to use this, or can you be essentially an Active Directory and Microsoft newbie and still pull these off as long as you follow the formula?
Yeah, unfortunately, you can. You can run these scripts and basically get really lucky. If you compromise an account or can run this under a context of a user that has privileges already, these attacks are going to take advantage of that and get you to that end state of compromising a domain controller or domain admins without really any thought or effort. If you compromise an account that doesn't have any privileges and then you have to look for holes in security, try different things, look for accounts that may be vulnerable, then most newbies are gonna hit a wall, and it takes a little bit more in-depth understanding of Active Directory and security to figure out which holes to exploit. But most customers, most organizations, they're not as advanced, and you're going to be able to get pretty lucky pretty quickly.
Yeah, so and you know that's that's been my experience as well, right? Is that somebody with just a little bit of luck and a lot of something you don't really think about in a hacker very often, just patience can usually get away with a lot of this, right? So, you know, next big question, and this we have to be careful here, the two of us, without naming any names, right? Uh, you know, you've spent a lot of time working with our customers, and then previous to here, you were doing consulting. Would you say that a lot of the customers you've worked with would be vulnerable to these types of attacks? And maybe the other way to think about this is, are these kind of vulnerabilities that these attacks take advantage of, do they exist because of very common practices, right? Are people doing things that make themselves vulnerable as just sort of what they think is the normal way to operate things?
Yeah, so I wouldn't have to name names because every customer I've worked with is vulnerable to these attacks to some extent, some more so than others. But let's look at a few of the basic ways that these attacks are perpetrated. One of the easiest ways is through administrative privileges. And in the case of this blog series, granting access to the local administrators group on Windows Server. That's how the Bloodhound system maps out an attack path. Basically, if you get to one system as an administrator, you can copy or extract all of the password hashes that are stored in memory on that system. So any other user that connects to or logs onto that system, you get that password hash, and then you can use the hash approach. So gaining administrative rights is key to moving throughout an organization. And this is almost always not well managed by having local entitlements inside of the administrators groups, Active Directory groups nested in there that have multiple layers of nesting, users that aren't even logging in or aren't even enabled in Active Directory having administrative rights. You see this just about every engagement we go into. And that's the main vulnerability that we're exploiting here in this attack path. The one other one I'll just mention on that's almost always overlooked is logon rights to domain controllers. Because most customers are looking at this from a compliance perspective, they're looking at their administrative groups, domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins. They're tasked with understanding and monitoring the membership of those groups because they're well-known administrative groups. But there's also other groups on these domain controllers that give logon rights, like backup operators and server operators, where having membership there, you can get on, you can perpetrate these attacks just as easily as if you were a domain administrator and get to the exact same data that you need. And those are almost never monitored or never well maintained because they're not under compliance regularly. So those are just a couple of examples of how these attack paths are possible in nearly every organization we look at.
And, you know, and I want to underline something you said there, because a lot of people, when they hear the notion of administrative rights, right, they think of the highest level of administration. Now, it's interesting. You mentioned the policy side of it, right? That's something I think people never think about. But they also tend to think, okay, well, when I hear administrative rights, I've got a system that controls my admins, right? And they're thinking about the people who do the heavy duty lifting. But I want to make sure that I'm clear here. You're talking about just the local administrator on either a server or even a laptop for that matter, where if you've given people in a lot of versions of Windows just the rights to install stuff, that account then has enough rights to start doing the nasty stuff the bad guys are looking to exploit in the kind of attacks you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and the extra scary part about that right is that it's typically managed through group policy in Active Directory using something called restricted groups. That's how you control who gets the administrative rights on your servers, your desktops, and all that information is queryable from Active Directory without having any elevated privileges. So an attacker in the recon stage can issue a query against Active Directory and say, show me all of your restricted groups, what group policies they map to, and where those policies are linked. And now you have a map right there of where all the administrative access exists within the organization without having any privileges at all. And from there to get to the point of exploit is not that difficult.
Yeah, see, and that to me is the scary part, right? Is because people hear admin and they just sort of immediately discount it a little bit, but they've got to change the way they think about what admin might mean, because there's a lot of different angles, right? Um, All right, so let's move on to sort of the last big thing, and we could certainly have a very long conversation about this last one, but I'm just looking for your gut instinct here, right? Um, until we had this recent flare up with all this Eternal Blue and these other SMB style attacks, a lot of this enterprise Microsoft vulnerability side of things didn't grab a lot of attention, right? Most people were thinking about phishing and malware, which they should. They're not trying to say they shouldn't think about that. But do you think it's appropriate that people gave as little attention as they did to these more enterprise style vulnerabilities? I mean, how would you rank, if you would, the vulnerabilities in the SMB layer and some of the stuff you're thinking about in sort of the long list of things people need to think about, right? I mean, I'll be the first one to admit it's probably not the top of the list, but is it in the top 5? Is it in the top 10? Just from your experience working with customers.
In many ways, I would say the ways that these attacks are perpetrated in the blog series that we talked about are scarier because they cannot be patched. So if you look at things like the Eternal Blue attack, it's taking advantage of vulnerabilities in SMB v1 that can be disabled or can be patched. We're looking at how we can take advantage of administrative rights, take advantage of ways that access is granted inappropriately. Those are not things that can be disabled or turned off because that's just part of how Microsoft operates. It's needed. So an attacker, they can start here because this cannot be turned off. This attack path cannot be shut down very easily, as opposed to vulnerabilities, which ultimately get patched.
That was the freight train going by StealthBit's headquarters there, in case anybody was curious about the sound there. And yeah, and I agree. I mean, I bring up the Eternal Blue thing only because it's very in the now as we're recording this, right? And it's actually got a lot of people thinking about the deeper side of security on the Microsoft platform, which, most of the time they just don't, right? And I agree. The stuff you talked about was probably a lot scarier. Okay, so that's it for today. I just wanted to get your perspective on some of the behind-the-scenes thinking, how you formulated these attacks, how we approached it. So thanks for joining us today. What we're going to do is we're going to share what you've learned about the Active Directory attacks with this video, obviously with the blog series and the video we recorded previously to summarize those. If you'd like to learn more, you can always visit us at stealthbits.com. There you'll find information about Active Directory attacks, the full blog and webinar, as well as security best practices assessment to help you find and fix these and other AD security risks. So thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
All right, that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in.